Some performers live for the limelight, always attempting to electrify audiences with pyrotechnics and cacophony. On the other hand, Gary Rossington was unique. Screaming, wailing into a microphone, or ripping the stage apart weren't necessary. Everyone knew the moment he played a soft guitar slide and free bird. Lynyrd Skynyrd's original spirit had been passed on to this final man. It was more than that for Rossington. Every one of those roles, founder, survivor, and keeper, fell to him. He was the unsung hero who kept Skynyrd going through the good times and the bad for more than half a century. Gary was the one who took Southern rock from rundown garages in Jacksonville to America's most illustrious stadiums, with that opening slide in Tuesday's Gone and the eerie sustain in Simple Man. However, music was just one aspect of his existence. There were mishaps, broken hearts, and sleepless evenings spent battling mental and physical anguish. Gary suffered the early loss of his father, the tragic loss of friends in an airplane tragedy, and the near loss of himself due to substance abuse and despair. He was far from perfect, but it was part of what made him authentic, down to the last note. Gary Rossington wasn't merely the last survivor of the original Skynyrd. It wasn't until his death in 2023 that the eerie quiet became apparent. He personified an age in music that will never be again. He was a symbol who could hold his own in the limelight. After the band started to feel like an extension of himself, he never left. Dale Krantz Rossington, his wife who was by his side right up until he passed away. When were you first exposed to the song Free Bird? If the tune lingers in your mind, Gary Rossington was never truly gone. Earlier years. The American South town of Jacksonville, Florida, where Gary Rossington was born on December 4, 1951, was characterized by red dust, roosters crowing at dawn, and wooden buildings spread out amid it. For little Gary, though, it was a paradoxical world, peaceful on the outside, but secretly suffering losses that no one could perceive. Tragically, he lost his father at an early age. There was more than simply emptiness in the home that unexpected death created. A deep hush fell over Gary's formative years as a result. Bernice, his mother, was a strong and pious Southern woman who reared him with the resolute spirit of a widow who was determined to keep her family's legacy alive. That tiny youngster, who was skinny and quiet, would one day play his guitar to the accompaniment of millions of people is something no one in his community ever dreamed possible. Gary had a desire of playing baseball and a cheap guitar as he grew up without a father figure. He would spend all day in the park playing baseball, dreaming of donning that iconic pinstriped uniform of the New York Yankees, with whom he was hopelessly obsessed. But then something unusual happened. Gary met the friends who would later help him form one of the best rock bands in American history, Ronnie Van Zant and Bob Burns, during an amateur game. Music was not the starting point for that bond. In the beginning, there were dusty baseball grounds, broken bats, and adolescent antics. But the three lads began performing together once they realized they all loved music, particularly the Rolling Stones and Cream. It all started in garages, moved to school grounds, and eventually wherever with an electrical outlet and a few heads that would bop to the music. Gary wasn't exactly a model student. Because he felt unwelcome in school and his classmates, he frequently got in trouble for not paying attention in class and for missing lessons to play guitar. But that wasn't a problem for him since he had discovered something else, a way to feel heard even when he didn't want to sing. As soon as the guitar strung strings, Gary shed his identity as a child without a parent. With the formation of a sound and the summoning of a Southern spirit, he joined a greater whole. And from the depths of that youthful spirit, Gary Rossington embarked on a path that he never would have dreamed would span more than 50 years. When I was first starting out, I remember the blistering heat of a Jacksonville garage in the 60s and the sound of scratchy, eager guitar riffs. Gary Rossington, Ronnie Van Zant, Alan Collins, Bob Burns, and Larry Junstrom congregated here to play around with repeating licks, building on their influences from blues country and British rock. After going by names like 1% and Noble 5, they finally settled on a moniker that seemed strange initially, but would go on to become famous. Their PE teacher's name was Lynyrd Skynyrd, instructor who had previously disciplined them for sporting lengthy locks. Gary had less than a year to live. He wasn't a very showy or technically proficient guitarist, but his playing had an effect that stopped people in their tracks. Softly, like a wound being sliced open in the air, the strings are slid across the instrument. Despite his lack of education and inability to read music, Rossington created the slide guitar style that would later be foundational to Southern rock based on gut feelings and an innate sadness. When the band first began performing, they played in seedy dive bars, school gyms, and other locations where the audience was frequently more inebriated than paying attention. Meanwhile, Skynyrd remained steadfast. They put in many hours of rehearsal and performed nonstop. Whenever they played, Gary would somewhat recede to allow Ronnie more space to shine, as if he knew his job was to support, not take center stage. Lynyrd Skynyrd, pronounced Lynyrd Skynyrd, released their debut album in 1973 following years of perseverance and a demo tape that ended up in producer Al Kooper's possession. Audiences across the United States knew they were in for a treat as Freebird soared. 9 minutes of unfiltered Southern soul propelled by an opening slide guitar solo that appeared to shatter the fog. The person responsible for playing that slide was Gary Rossington. Without being overbearing or attempting to be famous, his tone caused a global pause, and it was just the start. The first step toward becoming pillars of American rock had been made by Rossington and Skynyrd after years of banging on studio doors and playing night after night in forgotten places. A new chapter in American Southern music was being written by Gary, the child who had been disciplined for sporting long hair, who was now utilizing both his hair and guitar in this endeavor. A turning point in my career. Lynyrd Skynyrd was a national phenomenon from 1973 to 1977. Neither were they cerebral poets like Neil Young or polished charmers like the Eagles. Dust, booze, and the South's notoriously renegade spirit, a region where ego and misery were inseparable, were all brought by them. The man whose guitar glided softly and hauntingly, Gary Rossington, was at the center of it all. It seemed as though each chord contained an unspoken tragedy. Rossington, Ed King, and Ronnie Van Zant wrote the rebellious yet singable chorus of Sweet Home Alabama, and when it came out in 1974, the whole nation was captivated by it. Well, I hope Neil Young will keep in mind that a man from the South doesn't really need him. The media fixated on the song's political overtones, while Rossington composed the anthem-worthy opening guitar riff, gentle, proud, and irresistibly rhythmic. Rossington was never the most outspoken member of the band. The stage was under Ronnie's authority and Allen Collins personified wild imagination, but Gary kept the show on the road, both literally and figuratively. No one else could unite musical discipline with creative insanity like him. The role of Rossington became more established when Skynyrd issued albums such as Second Helping, 1974, Nothing Fancy, 1975, Gimme Back My Bullets, 1976, and Street Survivors, 1977. His presence was indispensable to them. Although there was risk involved, achievement was ultimately worth it. As the band rose to fame, they became entangled in a web of wild parties, drug use, and excessive drinking. Even the reserved Rossington wasn't safe. Tragically, he was in a car disaster in 1976, crashing his Ford Torino into a house and a tree just days before his concert. Despite his injuries, he managed to survive. As a close second came that smell. The scathing caution delivered by Ronnie Van Zant to Allen Collins and Rossington. Oh, so pleasant. Isn't that aroma overwhelming? There is an odor of death all about you. Still, Gary got back on stage, physically and emotionally bruised as he was. With the release of Street Survivors in October 1977, which featured the band engulfed in flames on the cover, Skynyrd was at the height of its splendor. They were getting ready for a huge tour across the country. Those 3 days of splendor were brief. The Mississippi forest was the site of the band's plane crash on October 20th, 1977. A dividing line between the pre- and post-crash periods would appear in the annals of Southern rock history from that point on. Even though Gary Rossington made it through another round, his artistic career probably came to a close not with a guitar scream, but with the scream of ripping metal and a soul irreparably broken. Resurrection and Tragedy, October 20th, 1977. The Convair 240, which was transporting Lynyrd Skynyrd members, crashed into a secluded area in Mississippi just 3 days subsequent to the release of Street Survivors. Everyone on board, the band's vocalist Ronnie Van Zant, Gaines' siblings Steve and Cassie, Abe Dean Kilpatrick, and the 2 pilots, died in the crash. The price was exorbitant, but Gary Rossington made it out alive. Wrists, ankles, pelvis, and limbs fractured. It took him almost a year to walk again after he lay comatose for hours, abandoned and thought dead. The most profound hurts, however, were not bodily. In his spirit, they lay dormant. "We had just entered paradise when we were tossed back into hell," Rossington remarked once. He had to say goodbye to the sibling he considered a greatest friend and bandmate. A sense of survivor's remorse lingered with Gary for a long time thereafter. For what reason was he alive while Ronnie had passed away? Resurrection did not bring about recovery. Gary sank into a profound melancholy. Every day, his body fought through discomfort. To dull the agony, he resorted to booze, medications, and eventually, stronger substances. He punished himself by staying indoors, avoiding others, and watching old Skynyrd tapes. Many thought Gary Rossington would be the only survivor of Skynyrd, a damaged and forlorn soul. Despite his overwhelming pain, Gary found solace in music, which he knew how to play. Not in an effort to revive Skynyrd, but rather to reassert his identity, he and Alan Collins established the Rossington Collins Band in 1979. This new band, which included female lead singer Dale Krantz, set out to break free of the past and create something fresh. Anytime, anyplace, anywhere, their 1980 debut album was only moderately successful. It was a huge spiritual win for Gary, though. After entering rehab and learning to forgive himself, he started to heal and eventually returned to his old self, albeit he was never the same. Her blazing red hair and powerful voice made Dale Krantz more than just his musical collaborator. She rescued him from the depths of despair. Following the dissolution of the Rossington Collins Band, they fell in love, tied the knot, and subsequently established the Rossington Band. Gary wasn't the only guitarist who made it into Dale's mind. He was adored just as he was, a spouse, a parent, and a man. When he was at his lowest, she was the one constant. The heroic tale of Gary Rossington's life has long since faded. This was an account of perseverance, getting back on his feet following a devastating plane disaster, overcoming an addiction, saying goodbye to loved ones, and losing touch with his former self. And just when everyone believed he'd fade away forever, Gary picked up his guitar, got back on his feet, and kept playing, not for fame, but to ensure that music would always be played. Gary Rossington was the reserved one on stage, but off it, he was a grateful guy, particularly to the woman who had saved him from the brink of despair. During Gary's lowest and most vulnerable period, shortly after the plane tragedy, Dale Krantz entered his life. Despite her role as lead singer for the Rossington Collins Band, something more profound started to take root in her during painful backstage moments and rehearsals. Rather than a passionate love affair, it was the slow but steady connection of two individuals who had both been devastated and were now looking for each other amidst the rubble. When it came to rock and roll, Dale was in a league of his own. She wasn't addicted to drugs or the never-ending after-parties, and she certainly wasn't pursuing fame. On the contrary, she was there for Gary when he was at his lowest point, the days when he was unable to walk on stage, the days when he vomited blood from alcohol, and the days when he declared he wanted to die. No, she stayed. With his hand as a guide, she picked up the guitar and began playing again, this time with a broken body and a heart that was hardly beating. They exchanged vows in the early 80s. A long period of recuperation and reconstruction ensued. Not seeking renown, but content to continue living and playing music, they banded together to form the Rossington Band and embarked on modest tours. They raised 2 children in relative seclusion in a Georgian home, away from the hustle and bustle of partying and the spotlight of major performances. Gary once mentioned in an interview that Dale was the first person who didn't consider him a Skynyrd. To her, I was just a guy who hadn't given up hope despite his ongoing pain. All that Gary had lost was reflected in that love, and what he was fortunate enough to hold on to was a miracle. No news, no scandals. Like the man himself, their marriage was unassuming. Its stillness, nonetheless, allowed it to persist. Perhaps Gary Rossington would have stayed an unresolved wound in rock history if Dale Krantz hadn't entered his life. But he didn't merely survive. He lived, thanks to her love. Gary Rossington's passing on March 5, 2023, left a lasting impression on the world beyond that of a guitarist. The last bulwark of Southern rock fell. He had kept the initial flame alive for nearly 50 years, never allowing it to dim. No one in the media ever wanted to shine a light on Rossington. He was not mythologized with grandiose stories, the focus of big films, or awarded Grammys. However, Gary stands as a monument unto himself in the realm of genuine music, where every note may evoke a sense of place. Rossington made an unmistakable sound by delicately gliding his distinctive Gibson SG across each word. An emotionally raw, fiercely independent, and profoundly humane Southern voice. There was more to songs like Free Bird, Tuesday's Gone, That Smell, and Simple Man than meets the ear. In the midst of conflict, turmoil, and a desire to remain faithful to their heritage, they were the beating heart of an American generation. Many contemporary musicians have paid tribute to Rossington, including Blackberry Smoke, Chris Stapleton, and even Blackstone Cherry, 2 of the hardest rock bands in the world. Not only in his music, but also in his daily life. Continually, quietly, and steadfastly committed to his legacy. Rossington was the one who accepted the induction for Lynyrd Skynyrd into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2006. I wish Ronnie, Alan, Steve, and all others who came before could be standing here with me. That was Rossington to the core, a man constantly in the background, but never absent, instead of giving a long speech. The original Skynyrd sound is irreplaceable when it comes to playing Free Bird, not because of his abilities, but because nobody else carries the burden that Rossington did. The pain, the love, and the loss of his bandmates. The will to live and an unwavering commitment to the music that had an impact on him. The music charts will never remember Gary Rossington. It will always be cherished by those who, upon hearing him perform, were whisked away to a faraway place in the South, where the sound of Ronnie's voice reverberates, the free bird flies freely, and the sting of a single string slide is like an unspoken farewell. Gary Rossington did not like his twilight years as an old man. After everyone thought their injuries from the plane crash in 1977 had healed, they kept popping up. The physical toll of rock and roll life, together with years of drug misuse and constant touring, finally got to his heart. The rock community was afraid Rossington would never perform again after he had a series of complicated heart procedures beginning in the early 2000s. These included stent implants, a cardiac assist device, and an open-heart surgery in 2015. He returned, nevertheless, playing each note of Free Bird as a gentle reminder, not too quick nor too harsh. Skynyrd hadn't fallen silent just yet, and he remained present. Rossington formally withdrew from touring in 2021 after undergoing yet another operation, and someone else took over guitar responsibilities. However, there were evenings when he would stealthily return to the stage, his wounds scarcely closed, as he continued to heal, just to play a few brief parts, no fanfare, no announcement. The audience was moved to tears by it. Afterwards, Gary Rossington went away at the age of 71 on March 5, 2023. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. Nothing more than a weary heart that had persevered through many years of sorrow, anguish, and recollection. The original Lynyrd Skynyrd story ended with his death. None of the original founders remained, not because of his fame, but because he was the last person who could recall it all. The rock community around the world mourned his death. Each note he played held the sorrow, loss, and eternal life of those who had passed on. He was the last guitar in a hallowed orchestra. Lynyrd Skynyrd kept performing Free Bird after he passed away. However, the guitar portion by Rossington was from an old recording. Standing in his shoes, nobody dared. Nobody was able to. For Gary Rossington, the guitar had a deeper meaning. Those days were over. The sensation was extreme agony. There was camaraderie. It was devotion. In the South, it was the pinnacle. That noise persisted even after he departed. Akin to an